Right.
Yes, well, I'll talk to this, but then you speak the next one, I believe.
All right.
Hello, Ross. How are you?
Hi everyone.
How are you? Are you in Glasgow, Ross?
I'm in Glasgow. Lovely,
to see you.
sunny, not so sunny Glasgow.
Where's your super duper microphone that you used to have? What
Oh,
happened
that's
to
in
it?
my house. Yeah, I'm in the office today.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We're
What
just
about
getting
the-
back to normal in Scotland where we're not having to wear masks and
Okay.
yeah.
And
I
are
know
you
down
happy
south
with
it's been like
that?
that for a while.
Okay. And great. Good to see you here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just interested to see how things are going. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's yeah, trying to looking at the work of Jan and Brian, and I think it's sharing with on their work and so on. It will be, I think, quite nice.
Great. Very nice slides as well.
Yeah, and a nice and next month then we'll have a follow-up on this also. Yes.
Perfect.
So I can see there's few people actually. There's Amos here as well. Hello, Amos.
Amos, yay.
Hey, Amos.
Good to be here.
Yeah, how
Hey.
are you, Amos?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah.
Where are you these days?
I'm at home in the United States and with my family.
Which part of the United States? It's a huge country.
I live in Western New York, so I'm kind of close to like Niagara Falls,
Okay.
not close to New York City though. Yeah.
So how far are you from the Niagara Falls then?
Oh, if I got in a car, I could be there in about an hour and a half's drive.
Okay.
New York City is about 6 hours in the other direction. Actually, we're closer to Toronto. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Close to Canada. Is that what you're saying?
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yep.
And what are you looking forward to this session, Amos?
Oh, I know a bunch of this stuff, so I'm looking for little bits of that I think I know, but maybe I don't know.
Great. And do you have a pen and paper?
I always have a pen and paper
That's great.
because my head is useless.
That's great. This is for everybody. If you don't have a pen and paper, it's good time to go and get a pen and paper now.
Yeah, we're going to be asking you to draw later.
Yeah, we'll have a very active session today. So please do get yourself either pencil, pen and paper, or get yourself trusty post-it notes. Not too many. You don't need to have too many. Maybe 4 or maybe 5. If you make some mistakes, maybe have 6. As that you have 2 spares. So it'll be good. I think I can also see some new people we have here today. And I just want to remind everybody that we'll have this session will be translated into Spanish. So we'll go through, if you're not familiar with the Zoom, then we'll go through procedure or suggestions, how to get yourself into the right channel. So, because if you're not in the right channel, you'll be listening then, both the interpreters and the speakers. And I think it's very important that you get yourself in the right channel. Are you, Lo? Good to see you again here. Exactly. This is from the Singapore, yeah? Are you in Singapore still?
Hi. Hey, Eric. Ursula, good to see you again. I'm still in Singapore, yeah.
Great to see you, yeah. And great to see you joining us again today. And do you have a pen and paper or pencil and post-it ready?
Yes, I do. After your very kind reminder.
Fantastic. That sounds very good. And Verena, are you ready to participate?
Yes, I am. Good morning or good afternoon.
Good morning.
Or
Yeah.
good evening, wherever you are.
Yeah, exactly. That's a nice thing about doing things online, that we can have people from around the world joining us today. I think what we're going to do, we're going to kick off the session There's few things just to remind you. The session is being recorded. So if for any reason and this is then the recording will be made available on the Design Literacy International Network website as a record, so people as a resource. So for any reason, if you feel that you do not want to be in the recording and you have been in the recording, do let us know and we can edit it out. And just a reminder for those who are joining us first time, this is a very friendly community, so please do raise your hand, come in, ask questions as we go. And before we go, Ursula, would you like to say something about the translation and the two translators we have and what needs to be done?
Ok, lo voy a decir en castellano. Las personas que no están familiarizadas con el Zoom, les contamos que esta sesión va a estar traducida. Tienen que, para seleccionar el canal del castellano o del inglés, deben ir al icono del globo que está en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Y además les contamos que esta sesión está siendo grabada y se está siendo transmitida a través de UDD-TV. Okay.
I'll just follow on in English. So if you have joined us, please do move your cursor on the Zoom, and you'll see a button, glow button. If you don't see it, then do please have a look at the three dots, which is more, and then you'll have there's two options for you to go into English or Spanish. So if you're English speaker, then select the English channel, please. If you're a Spanish speaker, then select the Spanish speaking channel into which the session will be translated to. And this would allow you then to listen to the appropriate language. And also a reminder that the session is recorded and is also made live on the TV Live. So we'll kick off the session, and can I ask Liv to introduce briefly the network, and then I'll introduce today's speakers, and then we'll kick off as we can. Liv?
Hello, and welcome to this event, Engage with Ideas, arranged by the Design Literacy International Network. My name is Liv Merete Nilsen from Oslo Metropolitan University in Norway. Today, we have invited Brian Howell and Jan Willem Hoftseiser to present their ideas. And a warm welcome to you, and we are very much looking forward to your presentation titled Visual Literacy and Design Sketching. Before we start, just a few words about the network and our events. We assume that design competence, meaning design literacy, is important for all in society. We're building upon the ideas of the Brazilian educator, Paulo Freire, and his ideas of literacy. But we have also added design to his concept of literacy. We can see other fields of knowledge doing the same. We have health literacy, economic literacy, eco-literacy. And objects and contents in these areas are different and must be seen in context, both in society and in education. So, in order to move in direction of a greener and better tomorrow, designers and the general public in their positions as politicians, consumers, users, and clients needs to be involved, skilled and critical in order to accomplish real cooperation. This is of increased importance for democratic participation, diversity and equity in society. Today is our 18th event, and through the 17 events we have arranged so far, we have seen different perspectives and inputs which have contributed to our reflection, both in theory and practice. And we're looking forward to a new perspective today. And Erik, please, would you introduce our speakers today?
Yeah, very briefly, because we are all waiting for them. So very briefly, I've met Brian a long time ago, and Jan also when I was at UDEL as a visiting scholar. And I've seen the work they've done in the past at different events, and they try to promote the importance of visualization and visualization. If you read about the kind of primary or kind of the contribution designers do, it's about visualization. Any of the research you read about, that's one of the things that designers can do. They visualize complex problems and are able to visualize them so that other people, collaborators, are able to understand them. This session is very much so kind of putting a little bit on ahead and trying to actually think about how visualization can actually pass on knowledge. And so what I'll do is, rather than me trying to explain what the session is going to be about, Jan and Brian, please kick off. And the screen is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, Erik. Jan and I, let's go to this page. Can you go to the second? There we go. Jan and I met, let's go back one page. Jan and I met five or 6 years ago, and we were sitting in an airport after an ENPDE conference, and we had a long wait, and we were discussing, the role of visualization and research. And we said we should start to build a community around visualization and encourage designers to produce research in this area. We've been organized under the Design Society for our 4th year formally. We have an international committee, many of which are joining us, Farina and Amos and Maurizio and Jose. They've all been very active in our community and have run workshops with us and had fantastic conversations. We cover both traditional analog sketching and reach out and do a lot of even cutting edge digital sketching, and Maurizio and Wendy and Jose are very much into sketching in VR. We've had about 9 workshops over the last 4 years at various conferences, and we've sponsored visual papers, which we'll talk about later, in 3 different design organizations worldwide. And then we've done 2 sketching webinars, this one and also one with Oscar. So welcome, Oscar. And I think in the next month, we're going to be getting together and talking about a future sketching conference that might, we hope we can arrange for 2023. Okay, next slide. This is our agenda for the day. We're going to talk about design literacy. Jan is going to talk about it. And then I'm going to talk about visual research papers. And then we're going to have a small exercise with the group and then open it up for discussion. And anyone can interrupt at any time if they have a more specific question. Okay, Jan.
All right, so thanks for inviting us. I'm very happy, just like Brian is, to be here. Actually, to be here among friends, so a lot of people who we know, and that's really nice to have an audience. So let's turn to the next page, which is about taxonomy of sketching, and obviously there are some taxonomies already. However, we thought it was really wise to think about in which direction is sketching developing, actually. And Brian has already mentioned some of them, as there are, for example, VR sketching, virtual reality sketching. But there are many more developments actually in design taking place that ask for definitions in which dimensions is this development taking place. And I'm just going to share some of the things I'm encountering and developing in my university, which is in Delft. Talked about that a lot with Brian as well. And as a matter of fact, Amos.
Can I just pause it for a second? Raise your microphone.
I'm not sure if I can do that.
Yeah, it's just a little bit away from you, and what's happening is there's something blocking it, and it's kind of going up and down. That's all.
All right, I'll get closer. Is it better?
Much better, thank you.
Right. So as a matter of fact, Amos has been visiting us in Delft for the last couple of weeks, months. So we're talking about this whole subject with him as well. So it's great to present some about it. Right. So as Brian mentioned, Oslo was kind of the kickoff of this sketching SIG, you could say, sketching community. However, we did that quite from the start together with some companies in practice, like From the Fear, with Rick and some other colleagues from him, Jort. We even together wrote a paper and actually established and initiated this whole thing about visual papers. And we're very happy that we could present them starting in Glasgow. I think it was in 2018 or 19. We get to that subject a little bit later. I'd like to start with this slide, which says about research about what is actually sketching and what kind of role does it have in a design context. And that is what it started with. And of course, added to that, that's why this literacy and taxonomy is there. In what way, in what directions does it develop? So some of the first, let's say, changes that take place is the fact that, at least in product design, it's, of course, always been about product design within a context, included its surface, of course, all being part of a system. However, it tends to be more and more important to include that even at the start of your product design. So this is one of the transitions and maybe one of the reasons why such a taxonomy is so wise to develop and to define what is actually design, in what way could sketching, it's a language of design, in what way could that play a part? So a very obvious, maybe, taxonomy dimension is actually the road from concrete to abstract, whereas in sketching, you could draw and learn how to sketch very tangible things, learn about perspectives, etc. In order to have the visual literacy to be able to draw anything that's more abstract or complex. As a matter of fact, this is, let's say, the range of what we are teaching at Delft, and I guess that it's quite similar to other institutions. To create this visual literacy, to actually define and depict whatever you want, a kind of basics would be necessary and advisable. And to the abstract area, what belongs there is roadmaps, journeys, all kinds of ways how to visualize processes, which also means that actually sketching from a design perspective does not only take place within a design context. As a matter of fact, each year more, in an increasing way, other fields, other disciplines are actually recognizing the fact that sketching, visualizing is so much more powerful than, let's say, discussing things or presenting things in words. Another taxonomy dimension would be static to dynamic. I guess that all of us would recognize the fact that a static sketch could really do lots of things, and even storyboard could show actually the dynamic behind it, because there's always this time factor in it. Moving pictures, motion is of course a very easy thing to add at least in these days, where things are getting more complex, but also more easy to do. So I'm moving a bit too fast. What I'd like to show you is the link here to Mental Canvas. I hope I'm sharing. Am I sharing this?
You are.
Right. So it's actually a new kind of application, which is, as you can see, probably quite simple because it's only depicting flat elements in a three-dimensional area. However, it creates a very great kind of visual display. It conveys a lot of information, much more than it could if you would only do that on a paper or a flat and very static way. Another thing is, of course, little GIFs really help in telling a story a bit better, more dynamic than a flat and very static picture. Another dimension could be from basic to advanced. When it concerns the sketching, or let's say the educational point of view, you could say that if you start with the basics, you're going to be able to draw much more complex things. So the advanced level is to be reached through drawing basics. Very much is in product design and teaching. And then there is the taxonomy dimension that concerns the purpose of a sketch. And we all know that we have different purposes of a sketch, and actually the most important one is the generative one. So being able to develop externalized thoughts, to be able to design in that way, using it as a language. However, of course, a sketch could also be explanatory, have the purpose of explaining, of communicating, of showing, of presenting. And in some cases, it's even as a persuasive function. Of course, visualization in all kinds of ways plays a part in that stage. And then we're slowly moving actually to maybe the main theme, so the visual literacy when it concerns stories. Whereas originally a product in a product design context would, of course, contain all of its information about that product. It's much more and more going to be interesting and important to depict the whole story around it. So storytelling is a very, let's say, hip kind of development, which is actually quite part of what sketching education is about. You see some examples here, not only of students on the right side, but also of agencies here in the center. This is from Flatland, a friendly company of ours. And actually in the US and in the Netherlands, there are lots of companies who just create these kinds of visuals of stories and journeys and roadmaps very successfully. Which brings us to, I think, the last slide when it concerns this taxonomy. The relationship between design and research, and sketching for design. Obviously, we've been discussing that. And on the right side, you see, and I guess that's Ross maybe recognizing himself, sketching. It was in London where we did a workshop, which was about visualizing your paper. So we all brought out papers and we tried to each stage sketch what we actually were talking about and discuss it with the other participants. I remember from that some of those participants were really happy about the fact that they could reflect easily and very accurately on what they actually were doing, not only by this reflection from someone else, but also by reflecting on their own sketch. Some even said that while they were doing that, and once they had done that, they actually saw what kind of parts of the stories were missing and which were maybe abundant. Let's move. Yeah. Well, this is, I guess, something where Brian could come in if you want, Brian.
Yes, I have to unmute first. Okay. So one of the another big topic that our community has been working on is visual research papers or non-written research outputs. I think if we go to the next slide, one of the challenges I think that we have as designers is that we think, communicate, and process knowledge visually, but then we're asked to write about and disseminate our knowledge and our research verbally or in a written form. And there's a mismatch in cognitive processing. So one of the first topics that our community began working on is creating these visual papers. And here's one of the first visual papers, an abstract that we submitted at ENPDE in 2019. And so it was, let's go to the next slide. And so one of the striking knowledges for me or insights that came to me through this process with the community is this idea about single and dual coding, cognitive coding. And single coding is primarily a verbal system, and it generates sequential or linear structures in cognitive processing using words, phrases, and sentences. And I would say much of the academic world is built around this single coding. But dual coders use nonverbal systems, and they generate knowledge transformations on spatial dimensions, size and shape, and sensory properties, including color, sound, and touch, and movement, including time and motion. And this has all been developed by the Canadian Pavio, and it's fascinating reading for me because he's coming to explain how I, or we as designers, view the world. And I've hopefully pursuing visual papers will allow us to use our superpowers, our visual powers, to disseminate our knowledge. So if we go to the next slide, you're going to see basically the same theory visualized, okay? So on the top, we have nonverbal. We gather information in a sensory, multi-sensory point of view, and then we process it in our brains. And then when we output it, designers or dual coders typically have simultaneous associations, and we code our knowledge spatially in a hierarchy, whereas sequential or linear thinkers do it with sentences. And I think this is a great insight for me to understand how we process our knowledge. If you can go to the next slide. So here's an example of identical content, one in a written form and one in a drawn or visual form. And they both say roughly the same thing, but they convey that knowledge in a very different way. Next slide. And so what have we learned in our little group? I think the sketching taxonomy that Jan spoke about has been very impactful in my pedagogy. And I've been able to frame the design department using this pedagogy and say, okay, these classes should be in these areas for these reasons, because now we're approaching basically a theoretical base of sketching, or I should say visualization. And these are the types of courses that we should be placing in our areas to cover the different topics that we need to be covering. I've learned that visual tools and methods and domains are expanding rapidly these days. The business schools are picking up visualization. Engineers are asking for it. And the tools and methods that are emerging are very exciting, and they're migrating the domain forward. we ran a study last year for the LXD conference. And we found between visual papers and written papers, and we ran it through, I don't know, 30 people, engineers, designers, and business people. And we found that visual papers are faster to read, and that there's a more preferred reading experience with visual papers, while they both provide visual and written papers provide equal learning outcome. We gave them a quiz at the end of the reading, and both papers, which were identical in content, one was just visually done and one was verbally, they scored basically the same. However, in that same study, there was a noticeable performance and experience difference between the disciplines. Engineers didn't respond very well to visual papers, while business people actually responded better to them, even over the designers. So there's some interesting disciplinary differences between how people respond to visual papers. We also learned that visual papers take longer to create, and they force you to be very clear with your thought and your content. We don't let words, when you're drawing an idea, the words can sometimes get in the way. And with an image, that doesn't happen. I'd also say that visual papers are somewhat still controversial. They're either loved or hated. People either really embrace the concept or they kind of reject it. And so we've had some great successes. If we go to the next page, we've had some great successes with visual papers, and a lot of organizations have moved us forward. Jan, next slide.
Yeah, sure.
But we've also, oops, wrong way. So we've also had some good success. So we've seen visual papers. I started seeing them in 2017 at this art and design conference. And then in 2018, the CHI conferences embraced them wholeheartedly. And then in 2019 was our first visual paper call track at the ENPDE conference in Glasgow. Thank you, Ross. And that's been going on. Was it in Herning at ENPD in 2020? And then in this last year, the Design Research Society and LearnX Design asked us to help sponsor visual papers, again at ENPDE. And then Verena introduced us to the IDSA, Industrial Design Society of America, where we also sponsored visual papers. And then had nothing to do with our community, but IASDR also last year sponsored visual papers as well. So visual papers are trending. They're showing up in a lot more organizations across the globe, which is very exciting for us. But it's also very much at the rudimentary level, and we invite people to participate as much as they can with us. Can you do the next slide? Okay, we're going to ask you to do an exercise now. Jan, would you? And we're going to ask, I'll keep talking, Jan, and then we'll turn it over to you about halfway through. So we're going to ask you to visually communicate your research agenda. And let me give you a few insights and an example. So we'll run through the next slides really quickly, and then we'll let Jan finish up. So the whole concept behind a visual paper or visualizing your work is to reduce the information to its essential form. You go to the next slide. And there's some, what is the vital information that you want to try and get across? And maybe some supporting narratives. Go ahead, next slide. And you have to think about how you're going to organize it on the page and how people will visually flow through that page. And so titles and icons and details matter when you build a paper. And the next slide. And there's how are you going to codify your idea? So this is probably one of my favorite pages right here. Is the concept was we had 9 students taking pictures, and so these are all different visualizations of 9 students taking pictures. But which one should we use, right? This is us trying to communicate this idea. And there's a variety of ways to do it, but making them visual forces you to consolidate this idea into a single statement. Okay, next page. And then as you build out a paper, it's also important to remain consistent in your style. And you can build a, kind of a key elements page that you use over and over and over again. All right, last page for me. One more. And so here's an example of, me, how I'll design, and what do I do in a teaching situation. So Jan, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Yeah, so the assignment actually relates very much to what we've been discussing until now, actually about conveying your story. And the story we'd like you to convey is about you. And as Brian said, one of the things you could do and try is to just take, let's say, 2, 3, 4 frames, just like seeing in the example of Brian, and try to convey, depict, well, who you are, what your occupation, so the what is the subject of your research or the subject of your teaching, or what's your occupation in general. You might even want to add personal information to it, as long as it tells a story about who you are. Most interesting would be to not tell anyone or put your name on it, but ask someone afterwards if they would recognize you in this. Not so much by the face recognition, but more with the help of elements and aspects and factors and properties of you, who you are, and what you're researching. Before we go to that exercise, for which I'd like you to invite to a Google Drive place to hand it in, if you like, so we could have a talk about it afterwards. Before that, I'd like to show some examples which are not specifically the ones we're sketching now, but just to give you an indication of students who are not the very best sketchers, but with some effort, they tend to get to a nice result of drawing stories. So 1 second, I'm trying to share another screen, which is this one. Is this taking place? Do you see me scrolling?
Yes, you're good.
All right.
You're scrolling.
So this is actually one of the courses we provide, and it's not about that, but it's just an example of, in this case, not with frames and different moments, or let's say not considering the aspect of time, however, not with frames and any sequential kind of composition. But you can see that students in this case, they drew a kind of story within one area. In Dutch, that's called a praatblad. You can say it's a visual depiction, a visual story, however, all in one time. So these are all quite optional ways how to sketch processes, journeys, roadmaps, whatever you'd like to do. And just for your consideration, these kinds of storyboards, these kinds of sketches are in many cases used to communicate what a company is doing, or what the strategy is about, or what they have been doing, or used to align the company, or these kinds of sketches play a very important part in that. Right, so let's go to Photoshop, I can go there, yes. So do I share Photoshop in this case?
Yes, you are.
So an example could be, I've made some first attempts. Let's open a new one. So what you could do is start by all right, it's frozen, I guess. Okay. You start by taking your A3 or A2, sorry, A4, whatever you have in front of you, even on a tablet, the things you would have just available there, and start thinking about what you'd like to do. But please consider, let's say, some might be the start. Just start with frame number 1. In the end, you'd like to move to maybe 4 frames. Make them different in size, for example, and try put your story there. So I'm just preparing for what I'm going to sketch. And in this case, what I'd like to do is to just say something about myself. Well, as you maybe saw. Like this, I like sketching and I like painting. And so just to convey that a little bit more, there's a painting behind me. And some other things that maybe characterize myself are the fact that I'm driving a Volvo 740 station. And it's a kind of brick, as we all know. And I'm living in the city of Delft. So that might be something that could characterize my story. And of course, there's a mill because I'm from Holland. Although if I would explain myself to a Dutch person, I would never draw a mill, of course. So that's me. And when it concerns my occupation, what I do for a living is I'm teaching. So am I still sharing?
Yes.
All right. So what I'm doing there is
Yes.
using.
Yes, you are.
So professionally, what I'm doing is trying to establish, let's say, this, you could say, taxonomy of sketches. Actually, visualization as a discipline within the design discipline. And
John, I think we're not seeing your new strokes. We only see an empty box still.
Yeah, it says it's paused, but I'm not sure how I can stop that. I'll just share again. No.
Well, yeah, so hopefully everyone is doing this at the same time Jan is. Are you trying to draw what some of the ideas that you're doing?
I think it's working again, right?
Yeah, there it's working fine.
All right. So what I'd like to show you is just the things I'm doing and the things that you could do just to tell the story about yourself and what occupies you on a daily basis. And in the end, some things to maybe emphasize that story or make that story a bit more clear is to work with several things I told myself to share with you. So these frames are there to provide some kind of sequence in your story. And it's always a good idea to have some overlap. So this person here in front of you, being me in this case, just trying to get out of this frame, and the mill actually doing the same, tree doing the same. The other thing, if it's not really clear what the order is, don't hesitate to work with arrows just to indicate where the story goes. The other thing is don't hesitate to draw or to use text. So if you think that some things need to be explained, just add text. Not a problem about that. So here also text. This pedagogic schedule I have in mind is about, starting from basics to advanced. Just an example, your case and your story will be much different, I guess.
Okay.
So please go ahead and try to depict whatever you think characterizes you.
Thank you, Jan. So I think at this point, we're going to open it up to discussions or questions. Did any of you have an insight or clarification on your own work? Or does anyone have any questions for us?
I think there was a question from Ursula. She had a question. Ursula, would you like to come in?
Yes, I have a question, but it's not about the task.
No problem.
It's okay?
Yeah, of course.
Should I make the question?
Please ask the question.
Okay. Well, I think it's to use the sketching visual papers is very interesting. But my question is, used sketching as a research techniques or methods to collect information or analyze information, or just for communicate the research results?
That's a good question. Is that a question to me?
It can be both of you.
You can
have an
decide.
answer, Jan, you go.
Okay, well, I guess just like it is in sketching for design purposes, it's both. So for visual papers that Brian has showed you, what's happening there, of course, is for communication. So it has a explanatory function purpose. On the other hand, what I think is pretty valid to say is when you're sketching in order to find the right shape of, let's say, a product or of a website composition or anything that is iterative or generative activity. Just like that, sketching as doodling or just really preliminary trying things out, that's also helpful, I guess, in research. But mostly because that could help you to find a structure. I think you might agree that just open a new, like this. You might agree that if you would think about research, then in many cases, you would think about, okay, this is going to be element X of your research, which then relates to factor Y, and I want to validate that through, let's say, experiment set. And these relationships, and where does this come from, and where does this come from, and this come from, these are all things that you could, well, think about in your head, and also, of course, depict in text. However, the visual dimension makes it much more flexible. And of course, these are text with only balloons and frames and stuff like that. But you can imagine that if you want to make this more concrete, that if you would say, well, okay, this is about the factors of, let's say, global warming. And these are elements that concern people of our society, and make a depiction like that. Maybe it could help you even better than with text, just to reflect on your own research, just like Ross has done with all the other participants in the workshops in London, just to reflect on your research by making it more concrete. And sketching, I guess, is a bit more concrete than text. Is that an answer? I'm not sure.
Brian, would you like to add to it?
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Jan. But in this case, I mean, I think the sketches are to help to understand and cluster and do clusters, you know, of information. But how do you deal with the polysemy of the images? As a polysemic images are polysemics, rather.
I'm not sure if I understand that very well. Called polysemic?
I don't understand the word either, polysemic.
Yes. The images can have more than, no, the images, not the word, can have more than one meaning.
Meaning, right, okay, so...
Yeah. So this is a problem when trying to communicate research results.
Yeah, I understand. So I think the more concrete and the more exact you want to be, the less unambitious you could as well, ambiguous it should be. So there is, just like Brian said, it's quite important to be very clear about what you are visualizing. In that sense, the research that Brian showed, for example, of how to convey visually what you want to convey is quite important. But not in the sketching phase. I guess if you're iterating, if you're trying to find things, you're working for yourself mostly. But if you work for others, if you want to visualize and show to others, yeah, you must be very careful of what things mean. And many things could be explained in different ways. True.
Well, I'm going to drop in on this. And when we, as industrial designers, when we communicate with a factory in Asia, we do it primarily visually because it crosses language boundaries. we build a tech pack and we send that to Asia and say, this is what you want to do. And the primary purpose of the tech pack is to communicate visually, because it's in the visual tech packs that we can communicate accurately. And it's in the words that we have multiple semantic definitions, right? So to me, once we get into a visual domain that's accurately made, it's easier to create common understanding across a broad audience, more so than using words. And so a good visualizer communicates better often than a person with words, because it can be interpreted, words can be interpreted many, many ways.
So yeah, I mean, so do pictures, and it's a great example you gave about Brian communicating, in manufacturers in different geographic location. And I can give you an example of, this is 30 years back. A designer gave an example. They were designing a lock for a door, and the locks were going very difficult. There were difficulty putting into the locks, and it was very difficult to understand the manufacturers what they need to change. So they draw a picture, and this was still in an age of text machines. And the picture was about the lock need to go in, the key need to turn around, and need to lock the door, whatever it was for. But so the manufacturer said, yeah, we'll fix it all. So they fixed all the 50,000 locks, or how many they produced. It was already on the ship in Hong Kong, coming back to Australia. And they got parcel, with about 10 locks to test, and they could not take the locks out. The reason they could not take the locks out, because the designer has not communicated visually at the last image that the lock actually needs to get out. So the manufacturer assumes for those pictures, the lock needs to go in, locks the door, and you never take the lock out. I mean, the key, sorry. Okay. So what I'm saying is, as the words, language, the pictures are language. And for example, you have a Jan, it's got a windmill at the back of in his picture. If I have never seen windmill, I wouldn't have a clue what windmill is. So pictures are very much so culturally based. It's how you can make a sense of it. What do you think?
Yes, your example is, I think, has been experienced by many industrial designers, when Asia gives exactly what they drew back to them, and it doesn't fit the expectations. And I said, well, that's what you gave us. So, all right. Any other thoughts or questions from anyone?
If you don't mind, I would like to bring maybe Ross in, if Ross is still with us. And what I would like to ask actually is, Ross, what do you think is the contribution of visual papers to a knowledge or at the conference? How do they contribute to the conference, kind of like the other ways to communicating the knowledge?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I wrote a paper, visual paper, with the help of Brian and a few other people for the 2020 ENPD conference, I think it was. So that was after the Glasgow conference, which was the first one. And what I benefited from the paper was exactly what we're doing just now within the activity, in terms of seeing the story that you're trying to tell from a slightly different perspective. So the way that I initially wrote the paper in text was very prescriptive in terms of how to, it was all about the development of an online course. So it was very prescriptive in how we did it and what we would do differently in the future. But from developing the visual paper, it got me to understand the sort of nuances of the lessons behind what we had been doing in the development. So why we had made particular decisions and why those were important and how they could relate to other courses that we would develop in the future as well. So it was essentially getting a wider some insights to what the work that I'd done beyond what I'd really considered for that original paper. And working with others really helped as well. Brian had a couple of his students help us with the sketching on the paper. And they were in kind of what we were discussing just there in terms of interpreting the words in different ways, interpreting the images in different ways. And I think it's not a negative to say that, yes, people will interpret things slightly differently, but we know this anyway through text, and we have to be careful with the words that we choose to use. And so it does get you to think. It's in a slightly different way. But it can also be a benefit in that you can say things without being too prescriptive, too specific as well.
Thank you, Ross, for sharing your ideas with this. So is there, Brian, would you like to just wrap up perhaps? And I would like to thank to Jan for sharing us, this, how he created this, the information about himself. And maybe you can take us very briefly through it. But Brian, would you like to wrap up your session, please?
My dogs have decided to join us. So that's what you're hearing.
Beg your pardon? Your dog? Sorry.
Yeah. If you hear my dog in the background.
It's okay.
All right. So thank you for joining us today. We have a nice organization, a sketching organization. Hang on. Jan, maybe you can.
Yeah. So the optional plan is to have a look at the sketches you made and have them uploaded if you want. But I'm looking at Eric to just find out if there's any time left for that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, you can provide maybe information where to upload it or what to do with it, and then perhaps we can have a follow up and discuss it. Then because I think it's very interesting topic, and I think that it would be really nice to have a follow up again in the future. And
right.
And then next. And we have a Verena coming in next month, which is a follow-up around sketching, and it's about sketchnoting, how you can take notes through sketching. So that's which is really nice. So that'll be really good. So if you can maybe briefly outline, what would you like to what people should do with their sketches.
Well, what we could do, looking at Brian, if you agree, and also to Verena, if you agree, is if such a discussion would pop up next event, what we could do is I could provide a Google Drive address through a link. People, if they want, could submit, upload, and that is something then for the next time to maybe discuss if there is time. Another option is
can you look at yours? Hold on.
That might even be a better idea. If everybody just does that, then we have a great picture. I see Maurizio hesitating, actually.
Mauricio? You have not been drawing. Unbelievable. Amos, that looks fantastic.
If anyone would have a sketch, showed it, I'd make a print screen and they could share it.
Can we do that again, please, people?
Right, nice. I have it.
Fantastic.
And the new one. Thanks very much.
Really nice. Thank you.
Brian,
thank
you have taken care of your dogs. You go ahead.
Yep. Sorry, Brian.
Thank you for letting us join you today. If anyone would like to collaborate with Jan or our group, please send Jan or myself a message, and we'll invite you to our next meetings. If anyone would like to get involved with developing a sketching conference in the future, I think Jan and I are going to start speaking about that in 2 weeks, seriously. and we'd love to help, anyone who has questions about sketching in their pedagogy efforts or in their department efforts. We have some good thoughts about that. And so have a great week. And thank you for letting us participate today.
Thank you, Brian. Verena, before we go, would you like to just briefly say something about the next month, your session, and then we'll close this session down, all right?
Certainly. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for this awesome session today. And yeah, so next month we will literally build on what you just learned, or what we talked about. So I will share lessons learned from sketchnoting as a means to visually synthesize information, which is building on the dual coding theory that Brian mentioned earlier. So that's a nice segue into what we did today. And maybe we pick up the activity that we just started and take a little bit longer and refine that a little bit more, and develop some visuals, simple visuals that can tell that story, your own story. So that's what I have in store in a month.
Brilliant. And this will be based on one of your chapters you have had published about 2 years ago now. Yeah, which we'll circulate also.
Yes,
so thank you very much for all of for the session, Brian and Jan. We'll aim to bring you in again and maybe have kind of hands-on session at some point. And Amos, Ross, thank you for your contribution. Great question, Ursula, and thank you, Liv, for introduction of the network. And we're looking forward to seeing you next month. And in the meantime, safe and healthy being, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos. Me ha encantado ver esa experiencia. Yo lo hago mucho con mis estudiantes, algo parecido, es como un híbrido de storyboard, moodboard y todo esto. Gracias, súper interesante.
Gracias, Carolina. Te esperamos la próxima sesión, el próximo mes.
Muchas gracias, Úrsula. Hasta pronto.
Adiós.
Chao.
Adiós.
Hola, Mauricio. Chao,
Hola,
Brian.
¿qué tal? Cariños.
Gracias. Bye,
Bye, Brian.
Brian. Liv. Hugs.